Welcome back. Today I'm presenting something a little bit different. This is an interview that I thought would be a really good idea to have on the channel with a good friend of mine. His name is Pete Martocci, and he is a spiritualist, a medium based in Long Island, New York. And I've been quite good friends with him for a number of years, and we have exchanged lots of information all about these kind of subjects. So I thought I wanted to pick his brains around the subject of these states that I talk about a lot, the creativity, the flow state, tapping into this infinite field of intelligence, whether you want to consider that as being God or source or spirit or whatever. So in this, it's a very short interview because we had quite a few technical problems to begin with, and it might be something that we revisit and go into more depth with, but we just browse over some of those subjects. And similarly to the last video that I put on the channel, I mentioned a medium, John Edwards, who talks about his language of symbolism that he uses to convey a message from the spirit world. And Pete has a slightly different take on it, and I really wanted to share his view. And yeah, so you can find him, I didn't get to say this at the end of the video, you can find him on Instagram. He's got a website as well. I put the links in the notes under this video. So there were some other things that I wanted to talk about briefly before we get into that interview. And it's kind of like, what is the purpose between trying to understand, or the purpose of trying to delve into this state that I've talked about so many times, that these artists were tapping into, that scientists understand as the quantum field. What is the purpose of understanding it? I think there is this hidden knowledge that perhaps maybe ancients had, or there's like a missing link in our understanding of our own consciousness. I find it really incredible that in the age that we live in, we know so very little about our own consciousness and how we actually came into consciousness, how we receive information, how our mind works, all of these subjects. We've had philosophers like Jung and Freud, but really there hasn't been any great developments in that field, or really in-depth studies into what it means to be awake and a conscious individual and how we collectively communicate. There's still areas that I feel have real potential for growth and understanding, and I find it a really exciting topic to really kind of go down a rabbit hole with. And there have been some other areas that I've been investigating recently that might show up as future videos, and that is kind of, I'm really interested also in the historic aspect of how we evolved in our consciousness and our development as humans with our conscious ability and our intelligence, and how we're able to develop speech, etc. And there are some very kind of wacky theories that we could go into to understand why we had leaps. I don't necessarily just believe in what science tells us has been our understood evolution. For example, there have been mass extinction events. There have been periods of time where we've took huge leaps in our evolution into consciousness that are largely quite unexplained. So those are some areas that I am interested in. And so for example, some things that I've been looking at, have been like deep sea creatures, because I believe that this ability to tap in to this infinite intelligence, and all of the Eastern esoteric knowledge talks about this, and especially like ancient magical traditions as well. They talk about the middle pillar tapping into this almost like a pillar of light, and that's very, very common across lots of Eastern religions and esoteric historical teachings, mystery school teachings. And what I believe that is some way of us harnessing quantum physics to access other zones or universes or timelines, whatever you want to give it the name as, to, some people call it the Akashic Records, is kind of this infinite bank of data knowledge. That I believe that comes into our nervous system, and that we act like an antenna. And we can only really do that if we're very finely tuned and we look after our bodies, and that we know practices that help us connect. So I'm really interested in the nervous system, and that's come through some personal health issues that I've had to really heal my nervous system through some trauma that I've had in my past, and also I have neurodivergency as well. So I have a very sensitive nervous system. So I'm quite knowledgeable about that, and I'm quite knowledgeable about the vagus nerve and how it influences the fear and fight, fawn and freeze response. That isn't as basic as I think that we're led to believe it is. And I think if we look at some, like I said, deep sea creatures like octopuses, our nervous systems are basically evolved from that place. And you can see how an octopus reacts to its environment. It's very sensory, like it only has to touch something and it's, it shimmers with different lights and patterns. And so I think there's a lot to explore in this area, and I think it's fascinating. I think I'll leave it there. Actually, if you bear with me, I'm just going to get some quotes and I'll come back. Right, this is a book that I wanted to get some quotes from. It's called The Other Side, and it's by an author called Jennifer Higgie, and she was the editor of Freeze magazine, and she, in this book, talks about all of the female artists historically that have used spiritual means to gain their inspiration. And I've brushed on that topic, and it is something that I will go into more detail with, because a lot of what she's included in this book has been my life's work, and I'm very grateful that she's brought this book out, because it actually goes into great depth, and she's a fantastic journalist. And there's some passages in here that just really emphasise this idea that getting into the zone as an artist is important, and it's not something that's a new idea. It's been present forever, and this is why I talk about getting in almost into this flow state, this meditative state, in order to be truly creative. Because as you'll hear in the video that I'm going to show you, Pete talks about being this hollow vessel, this channel, and that's been mentioned so many times by artists over the ages. So there's a piece in here, it's on page 253, and it talks about an American-British physicist, because physicists it's often very linked to creative people. People from the creative fields talk about their artwork and receiving artwork in a way that can be explained by physicists. So David Bohm, he talks about matter being like frozen light. He was very interested in Buddhism, this guy, and he described matter as frozen light. She says, in ancient Greek, endios is one of the earliest epithets of God, and it means in the light. Light is a symbol for a higher state of consciousness in most spiritual quests. Light is the most common appearance of energy. Light of the sun, lightning and fire. So that's one example, and I've made many notes in here. Let's see if any other are relevant. So in this section, Jennifer's talking about Emma Kunz, and she's a fantastic artist. I wish I could find an image of her. See if I can. Here we are. I've got an image of her. If you could see in the background, she has these geometric shapes, and she supposedly channeled these images over quite a period of time, And let's see if I can find a passage it says here. So Kunz often referred to herself more as a researcher than an artist. Her energy-filled pencil drawings on graph paper, which she created with the aid of a technique called radiesthesia, the use of a pendulum to direct the lines, were never publicly displayed in her lifetime. Untitled and undated, they are mesmerising. More than 500 softly coloured detailed mandalas, stars within stars and squares dissected by ragged green lines. Circles floating in a dusty blue expanse that seem to spin and pulsate. Often created in 48-hour marathons, her pictures were the physical manifestations of her research, what she described as shape and form expressed as measurement, rhythm, symbol, and transformation of figure and principle. Kunz thought of them as holograms, spaces to enter answers to questions, be they physical, political, spiritual, or philosophical. You don't need to know anything about either art or mysticism to appreciate their beauty. So it's interesting, this crossover between art and science, and I went down a bit of a rabbit hole today looking at some of the imagery that comes from cymatic arts. Well, if you look at Annie Besant's book Thought Forms, actually I might grab a copy in a sec, she shows cymatic art, which is the vibration of sound, and the patterns that it forms is often very similar to a lot of the channeled art that's coming through. So it's almost like an imprint of the universe is being stamped upon the canvas or in the sand, you know, it's one and the same thing. You know, what is that universal intelligence and that knowledge trying to tell us? So here is that book, Annie Besant and Charles Webster Leadbeater's Thought Forms, and this was a book that was all about receiving information as art from the universe, I suppose. And they created a whole almost dictionary of sound and form, which was almost like the precursor of abstract art, and it was very influential amongst artists such as Kandinsky and Hilma of Klint, who certainly had a copy. But here we have a chart of cymatic diagrams almost, it's like a pattern, they're like tesserae, and those are made from sound. And you can see there's a lot of similarities between the channeled art of the artists of that time. Yeah, well, let's leave that there and let's get stuck into the video. I hope you enjoy. All right.
My signal came back there.
Yeah, right. Okay. Shall we try and...
Yeah, let's try and do this.
Well, I was just going to talk about, because my YouTube channel is all about, you know, consciousness and art, but I'm also interested in, like, I think I did it on my Instagram the other day. I did a video where I said I think like flow states, channeling, mediumship, it's like all the same things, like it's all the same state basically.
Yeah.
And in the last video that I did where I talked about I did mention some mediums and like this mediumship circle that I'd worked in, and what the guide there taught me about sort of seeing like this language, this code of symbols and everything. So I kind of wanted to talk to you about that, and because you're doing the mediumship classes.
Yeah.
So I really like the way that you teach that, you know, when you see. So I'd like you to, I don't know, give a bit of an introduction. I mean, we haven't got much time, obviously, but just to give some brief overview of how you got to that state of understanding how to channel, how to teach channeling. I don't know if you maybe riff on that, how you got into it, how you got to that point of being able to actually teach it in that way.
Okay.
And then maybe from there, if you've got time, like how you're kind of progressing into sort of using art as a means of like expanding that.
You ready?
Yeah. Go for it.
Oh, okay. So I would say basically when people think of like mediumship or connecting to spirit, they think of like the classical cultural representations of that, and movies, TV, art. Like what they have this picture in their head, what they think it is, and it's a big misconception. I think that most connecting to spirit is really just connecting to your imagination, and like understanding like how they communicate is the biggest aspect, because people think it's supposed to be this like grand experience every time. You see these movies where somebody's a medium or they're a detective who sees spirits, and there's like these spirits flying around her house telling her whatever. To me, it's really just like learning how to connect to your imagination and understanding how to kind of receive information through your imagination. So like if I tell you to visualize something in your head, like an apple, most people, I know there's people who can't, but most people can see an apple in their head. And it's like, where are you seeing this? In your mind's eye. Like, for me, I see it like right here. And there's like a place that I can go to see things when I want to connect to spirit, or I want to ask questions, or I want to, if I'm doing art or I'm drawing, or, this is where I see things. And the spiritual realm, I think, uses your nervous system as a way of conveying messages. So, like, if I tell you to feel a wet sponge and you try to feel it, like, where do you feel it? And most people will say, oh, they feel it in their hands or whatever. But it's like, if you touch something with your hand, right? Is your hand feeling it, or is your mind feeling it? And then what you learn to discover is that like your hand's feeling it, but it's really like you could feel it when you really tap in and become aware of your nervous system. You feel it through your whole body. So like that can be an avenue for spirit to communicate. If you want to connect to spirit and you ask a question, you can feel it. They can use your nervous system, give you messages. And the same goes for hearing. If I ask you to hear an ambulance siren, most people can hear it in their head, but where is it coming from? What is that sound coming from? It's coming from memory, it's coming from your brain, it's coming from past experiences. And all spirit does is kind of tap in and push that energetic pattern that allows you to know a sound. And it's really that simple. People expect this like big thing, but it's very, connecting to spirit is very subtle, and your job is to kind of learn how to make it less subtle, I guess, and try to tap in deeper. And
I just think a lot of people would say, wait, what? Every time I'm imagining like anything, does that mean that I'm connecting to spirit? And I think some people would
I
think,
say yes.
yeah. Yeah, I probably agree with you, but I think a lot of people would get confused as to like whether everything that they can perceive in their imagination is from spirit, or whether that's them thinking.
Yeah. So I think
any clarity around.
Okay, so at first I think spirit is kind of maybe a loaded word in a way. I use spirit because that's how I was kind of raised in my process. But I think a better word might be like infinite intelligence, because it's like I think what we're tapping into is actually like more of a field or a dimension, or like a layer of this reality. So it's kind of all knowing in a sense. It's like in essence you're connecting to God. And then if you're connecting to art, it's more of like an energetic field and you're bringing something through. And then like if you're connecting to a spirit, like a medium, it's kind of a focal point of this infinite intelligence, you
Yeah,
know?
that's interesting to me because, like, a lot of people, because I'm an artist, and when I was young, I could always draw really accurately. And people would say, you just got this natural talent. And I could see things in my head, and I did try and depict them. But I think people assume that if they can't draw at a good level, that they're not good at art and they don't have that ability. But I think that is just practice. I think
Yeah.
it's just practicing doing that again and again and again and again, whereas some people don't and expect themselves to like be able to do it instantly.
Yeah, well, for me, like I always used to tell people, anybody could do mediumship. It's not special. It's
Yeah.
not a gift. You know, it's like, and it's like anything in life, like genetically, like, yeah, I'm a big guy. I was an athlete. Like I could play football in college. Not everybody's going to be a college football player, but
Mm,
you could definitely throw a football if you had, you know, like
yeah.
everyone could throw a football, you know? So there's always
Yeah.
going to be people who it flows naturally because that's their, you
Mm,
know, that's their manifestation on this earth, their purpose, you know? But
mm.
everybody could tap into it.
Yeah, I mean, I always argue with that with art. I always say I think everyone has the ability to be creative, and everyone is creative in their own way, whether it's like music or whatever. Everyone has some sort of creative element to themselves. But a lot of people just instantly shut that down and say, I don't have a good imagination, I'm not creative. But I mean, my mum was an artist, so I'm gonna have had a head start, you know, because
Yeah, yeah.
I've seen that. Like, but yeah, no, I'm just really interested in, I mean, to me, like talk about being an athletes get into that flow state as well to achieve excellence. I read recently that flow state was like when you're trying to excel yourself beyond what you can normally do, you've got to have an element of pushing yourself a little bit, but you're kind of zoning out and surrendering
Yeah.
to something greater. And I think there's that kind of shift that happens when it's similar. It's that same
Yeah, well,
flow.
so like, I think for me personally, like through my experiences, like something that I always kind of latched onto that always made a lot of sense to me is there was this medicine, Lakota medicine man named Fool's Crow, and he talks about becoming a hollow bone,
Mm,
right? And it's like the thought is like the divine is always there and you're like the vessel for the divine, but your job is to like almost clear yourself out, whether that's programming, trauma, emotional, whatever, really clear almost like yourself out of the way and allow the divine to flow through you. And that can manifest in any way. That can manifest as an athlete, and that can manifest as an artist. It can manifest as anything. But what's happening is as you clear things out, you allow this divine version of yourself to
mm.
kind of come through. And really the key is to get out of the way, you know?
Yeah,
And
that's interesting because I that's one key thing that I do sometimes when I'm coaching that I always find flicks a switch in people when they're have imposter syndrome or they're very self-conscious. I say if you get out of your own way and become this vessel for receiving what your gift is, then you're being of service in providing it, you know. And it's the same principle. Yeah, I find that really it's really empowering in a way, but a lot of people find because it takes you out of ego as well, doesn't it? Because it's not you.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, it's not like, I don't know. I was always taught mediumistically, like it doesn't come from me. Like what
Yeah,
you know, and that's like a big part of the problem is like, even in any aspect, it doesn't have to be mediumistically. It's like if you're an artist and you're really just flowing and letting things flow through you, your product doesn't matter. You know, your product matters to you because you're judging it from the ego sense. But if
mm,
you're fully surrendered and whatever's flowing through you flows through you, the product doesn't matter, you know, because like you, even as a medium, you would give people messages, and you know, it's not always what they want to hear. It's what they need to hear. You
Yeah,
know,
that's
and that's like
interesting.
kind of the same thing when it comes to art. I you know, this is just my experience. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but I think, you know, you're serving spirit.
Mm.
You
Yeah,
know, you're serving divine. You
I
know,
totally
it's
relate because to speaking from my own work practice, I've recently completely departed from doing kind of more egoistic art to doing exactly what you're talking about. And I've lost my thread now, so I'll have to cut that out. I
all
have to
right.
come back to it. Oh, where did it go?
Getting out of the way, ego, um, doing your art, less ego, you know.
Oh, it's gone now.
But it's like, think of anything you think of. If you do it, it's like when people say, you know, do a job you love instead of doing a job for money. You know, it's like eventually the money comes because you're in such a higher state of like flowing through something that you love. You know, the money will come. It's the same idea in a sense, because you're just doing something from love instead of like doing what you think you should do, or doing what your programming's telling you should do, or your religion or your upbringing, whatever, you know.
Yeah, I'm sort of thinking about some of the artists that I'm really interested in, like Hilma of Clint, and some of the ones from sort of over 100 years ago that were doing exactly this. And they were sort of told that they invented modern art or abstract art. And the first instances of abstract art were spiritual channeled art.
Yeah.
Kandinsky and Hilma of Clint and Georgia Houghton, who was even before that. And yet that's only now just been recognized that they started that movement. And it's so interesting because you think about the times that they lived in, like 1900s, whatever, to produce something that was so wildly different from anything that had ever come before, that was like completely traditional art, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, they had to completely get rid of all of their ego and any sense of themselves to allow that to come through. And you know, a lot of them had exhibitions, and I just think that it is completely ridding yourself of any attachment to what, you know, they obviously truly believed that that art had some kind of message. Or I also think it's almost like a code or something, and that's why I link it to mediumship, because quite often, like the way I work, I know that when I receive stuff, I don't know what it means, but it might make sense to someone else. But that's it's kind of what I wanted to talk about with your art, because if you are receiving an image on behalf of someone that you're working with as a message, that does take quite a leap of faith.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the difference between, you know, somebody who's starting out mediumistically and somebody who's a good medium, is that you have to have the experience to trust the message, and
Yeah, that's huge.
not get wrapped into like somebody's reaction. You know, like
Yeah.
I remember my mentor, well, I used to do public demonstrations at spiritualist churches, and like I remember times where I've been in front of 100 people giving messages, and you know, you go to somebody and they're like, nope, it doesn't make sense, you know, like, oh, can you take this person? Doesn't make sense. No, I don't know who that is. And then you're like crushed in front of all these people because you want to be good at what you do. And then the week later she came back and was like, oh, it made perfect sense, it was this
I was
person,
just
blah
going to
blah
say
blah.
that.
And
Because
you're
that's
just
happened to
like,
me loads of times. Like when I've given messages, quite often they've gone, I've got no clue what you're talking about, and you think, oh, really messed up. And
yeah,
they always come back and say, do you know, I've completely forgotten about, and it all links up to something.
yeah. And then, you know, so I think those experiences happen to teach you to have the confidence that
Yeah.
like you're not, you know, this message isn't coming from you, it's coming from them, you know.
Yeah.
And even something that one of my mentors used to do is like the energetics of yes and no, so it's like if you ask me something and I say no, like what does that do for you energetically? It shuts you down.
Mm,
You could feel
mm,
the energy of the no. So it's
mm.
like you just have to learn to detach from the outcome, and know that you're doing the good work. I mean, I don't know, this.
Do you feel that sometimes like language is quite limiting? Because like you said, with just even saying no shuts you down. And I sometimes feel the way spirit, I mean, however you want to say that intelligence communicates quite often comes through so abstract.
Yeah, well, I mean, I
Um,
think for me personally, I think that's why I like teaching so much, is because a lot of times you can give people's messages and it's like there's a certain level of disconnect because it's coming from me, it's not your own
mm,
experience. So I think like when people, for me personally, like I first started opening up from having experiences, and then you have these experiences to the point where you're like, all right, I can't really question this anymore, so like what's going
mm,
on, and it makes you do your own work. So I think, I always try to teach people rather than tell them the messages, because it's a much deeper experience and it's a much deeper awareness. And I think it's awareness that helps us grow spiritually. Like I could tell you anything, I could try
mm,
to teach you any process you want, but you have to feel it. You have to
mm.
have that awareness in yourself. It's like everybody who says, "Oh, we're all one, we're all one," but if you don't experience that, you don't know what that really means, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all experiential, that this everything we're talking about. And I think like what was it that gave you that faith? Was it how like was it a certain experience? Was it a set of experiences? Was it just over years of experiences? Or
I think it's just really experience and having people, you reflect, like you'll see if you're, especially if you're working and reading people or helping people with certain things, it's like everybody's kind of a reflection of what's going on with you.
mm,
So you start to, like, in your sessions, get your lessons shown to you, or you
mm,
start to see people who maybe are, not that I'm better or worse, but I feel like sometimes you get shown people who are maybe like a step behind you, and you see like, oh, I used to do this. Isn't
mm.
it obvious to her that this is, this way or that way? So it's kind of
Yeah.
like you face these like recurring lessons that kind of teach you that,
Mm.
you know, you were there, and look how obvious it looks now, you know? And I noticed that, like, I think just realizing that everybody is a reflection of you in some way or another, and how you react to those triggers and reflections, I think it's experience.
I know that you talked with Jessa about this yesterday, I think. Was it yesterday?
Yeah.
Um, about, I mean, you were talking about sort of demons and entities and this idea of everything being just you and a reflection of you. Um, what would be the point of like channeling at all? If that was the case, is like to give someone a message.
From themselves.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
I mean, to be honest, I think about this a lot, probably
mm,
more than I should, because I've had the awareness of feeling everybody is one a couple times,
mm,
like a real deep awareness where I was like, holy shit, like it's me, like we're all one, like a real awareness. And, that kind of like blows your ego apart. But yeah, I mean, I don't really have an answer to that. I think that, of course, like we're in the 3D realm, so it's like you you don't know that every day, like within you.
mm,
And I think, real enlightenment is to find that in your everyday, like not to react and just kind of feel the essence of like, you're me and I'm you, and any issue that you have within you is kind of a reflection of what's going on with me, and I'm attracting you based off of that. And to me, it's more empowering because it's like,
well, I also think, like, sorry to interrupt, but I have to get it out. Like with art, because a lot of the purpose behind me doing the art that I do at the moment, which is just allowing stuff to come through, I feel that it is exactly what you're saying, because what I produce on some level, when someone, not everyone, but someone who needs to see that message will see something in it that is a reflection of them. Do you know what I mean? Because like I said, like,
well,
everything
but
is
I
an
mean,
expression of your subconscious or that intelligence. And to someone, that's why art is subjective, because it makes sense to some people, not others, because they recognize something in it which is an expression of some feeling. Or
well, I mean, think about your favorite book, right? Like, you read it maybe 10 years ago and you read it and you got something from it and you understood it this way. Then you have had all these experiences and it's like you read it again and you're like, wow, this part makes more sense now, or this is like, and all it is like anything that's bringing through some sort of message is always going to reflect, your inner self back to you after you read it. I mean, like, I know I used to be big into like Abraham Hicks and Esther Hicks when I first started opening up, and you'd like listen to something when you were 10 years ago, and then like you listen to it again and you're like, wow, there's this little piece that you missed, that
nuance.
Now you understand it.
Yeah, it's like an onion, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, I think, like I said, is like the goal is to kind of clear yourself out of the way, because then you allow the fullness of whatever's supposed to come through you come through you. I mean, that's just my experience so far. I haven't come up with anything else.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about, because I haven't got much time, but I just wanted to touch on, the other day I was listening to a podcast, I can't remember who it was, but it was about cave art. And they used to think that a lot of these sort of animals and weird creatures that were in cave art were just hunting scenes. And now, I don't know whether it was something to do with Terence McKenna or someone, but they basically said, no, they're basically all shamanistic drawings. They're all of the creatures are creatures that the shaman would have seen during trance. It would have basically been teaching the tribe something, and that teaching would have probably moved them forward on some level of consciousness, like you're saying, giving them that extra level where they've progressed on some level. And that was so important, they had to record that. That's the latest theory on cave art. It's not them just saying, oh, there was a bison, so we did a picture of bison. It was like,
so it's funny, I was just watching some video, I don't even know where I saw it, but it was so interesting to me, is that I guess when you're born or you're growing up, young baby or whatever, you have like specific neurons that are like supposed to, like, you have one set of neurons that like learns how to interpret horizontal lines. You have like one set of neuron that interprets like vertical lines or a round shape. Like there's like different groups. And I saw this like thing about like how our ancestors like didn't have certain colors, so they wouldn't be able to like see certain things. Like if you showed them different shapes today or different colors, they wouldn't see them. They wouldn't even register in their head.
Really? What? Because they didn't have the neurons like to
okay, because they weren't taught it. And I think these scientists did like this experiment where they took like a mouse or a cat and they kept them in like an environment that only had vertical lines, and like the cat, somehow they could tell that the cat, when it came out, couldn't see the certain lines afterwards, like being raised in that environment.
That's
And
like Plato's cave. You know,
yeah, and something that came to my head is like, I don't know why this always stuck in my head, right? But when we as a society, like the world, came off of like analog televisions, I think it was,
yeah,
they said that like telescopes on Earth could see farther into space because the analog was like affecting the atmosphere and like blocking us from seeing us further, right?
really.
And that always stuck in my head because I thought like
Wow.
it makes me think, like, what are we not seeing?
Yeah.
Like what's on us now that is blocking us from seeing something else, you know? I know I went on a weird tangent, but
No, that's interesting.
yeah, I'll see if I can find the
I'm gonna have to.
video.
We're gonna have to draw it to a close now, and
Okay.
you're perfectly framed with the sun kind of coming out the back of your head. You look like you're
I got lucky.
chosen
Yeah.
one. So yeah, we might resume this at another point.
Yeah.
No,
sure.
I think we did cover quite a lot of things that I wanted to talk about, so that was good.
All right, cool.
Yeah, and I really appreciated your perspective.
Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah. Cool.
I'll see you.